I want to begin with you and get to that Trump tweet from over the weekend after the G7. Most people focusing on the first bit of the Trump tweet. We're going to focus on the bottom line that some people might have skipped as we look at tariffs on automobiles flooding the US market. Elizabeth, are Germany and Europe prepared for what might be coming, and what do you think might be coming?
It's a great question, and I think one thing to note is that it's not exactly the first time Trump has trotted out these comments. He's hit out time and again at EU tariffs on auto imports and repeatedly singled out the German car makers. I think at one point he complained about too many Mercedes-Benzes driving on Fifth Avenue. I think what's changed at this point in time and what's gotten everyone more worried than before is that all of this is occurring against a backdrop of ever more heightened trade tensions, as we saw over the weekend with the G7 meeting, and then also today Germany's saying they're more than ready to retaliate against those aluminum and steel tariffs.
Elizabeth, the automakers in Germany have been slammed over the last month, some of them down near 10%. What's interesting, though, is that some of those automakers have huge manufacturing presences in the United States. Is a tariff on any of these automakers actually that bad, considering that BMW up on the screen has probably its biggest production plant here in the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, tariffs for BMW and for Daimler, the picture is not as easy because, like you're saying, they have already significant production capacities in the US. The vast majority of that production is exported, by the way. But we've already had BMW commenting in an interview over the past couple of days that they could easily switch, oh, well, actually not so easily, that they could switch some of their production capacity in the US to make sedans for the local market there. And they also commented this could be an exercise they can achieve, but it would be costly.
Elizabeth, it might also explain why we did actually see such a diplomatic Chancellor Merkel, very careful with her words to the President of the United States in last night's TV interview. Great to catch up with you. I want to bring in Craig Trudell out of Detroit. Craig, the President seemingly taking away with one hand and potentially giving something with the other, because the steel and aluminum tariffs are certainly not going to help the car producers here in the United States. So what can he do on the other side of the trade to help the US producers?
Well, he's really in a difficult spot here because there is sort of a headline takeaway when you look at the numbers that everybody is an importer. And when you look at just breaking down who are the biggest importers on a brand basis, 2 of the 5 biggest actually are Chevrolet and Ford. So for all of this talk about the crackdown on imports, especially if you include Canada and Mexico in this conversation, as the administration ended up doing with the steel and aluminum tariffs, this would have a significant negative impact for U.S. automakers, in addition to the likes of BMW and Mercedes and Toyota. So, you know, this is not so easy, actually, for the administration to crack down on auto imports without hurting some of its own producers and some of the biggest producers of cars in the U.S. You have GM and Ford would have a huge impact. GM makes a lot of trucks down in Mexico. Ford has some car plants down in Mexico. Even Fiat Chrysler, you've seen President Trump make a lot of noise about praising the company for moving some truck production up to Michigan, but that's not going to happen for a few years.
So, Craig, it does actually raise the question whether the President and this administration's goals are actually aligned with the companies themselves, because I'm sure these companies would just like the status quo, to carry on producing in Mexico, operating freely, importing freely. The President wants more production back here in the United States. Can he get it?
I think on the margin he can get some incremental announcements like we've seen with Fiat Chrysler, and we've seen on the campaign trail Trump talk about that announcement over and over again. So I think we will see some incremental announcements, some announcements of previously planned investments. We've seen a lot of that from the companies where they've talked about some of the spending that they were going to do already and just maybe sort of make a little bit more noise about it than they would already to try and pacify this administration.